This is John Kitover, Chicago mayoral candidate, reading Ayn Rand's Virtuous Selfishness, The Cult of Moral Greatness, page 91. Observe that their dominant overtone is no quest for the white, but an obsessive terror of being branded black, and with good reason. Observe that they are pleading for a morality which would hold compromise as its standard of value, would thus make it possible to gauge virtue by the number of values one is willing to betray. The consequences and the vested interests of their doctrine are visible all around us. Observe in politics that the term extremism has become a synonym of evil. Regardless of the content of evil is not what you are extreme about, but that you are extreme, i.e. consistent. Observe the phenomenon of the so-called neutralists in the United Nations. The neutralists are worse than merely neutral in the conflict between the United States and Soviet Russia. They are committed on principle to see no difference between the two sides, never to consider the merits of the issue, and always to seek a compromise. Any compromise, any conflict, is, for instance, between an aggressor and an invaded country. Observe in literature the emergence of a thing called anti-hero, whose distinction that he possesses no distinction, no virtues, no values, no goals, no character, no significance, yet who occupies and plays in novels the position formerly held by a hero, with the story centered on his actions. Even though he does nothing, he gets nowhere. Observe that the term good guys and bad guys is used as a sneer, particularly in television. Observe the revolt against happy endings, the demands that the bad guys be given an equal chance at an equal number of victories. Like a mixed economy, men of mixed premises may be called gray, but in both, the mixture does not remain gray for long. Gray, in this context, is merely a prelude to black. There may be gray men, but there can be no gray moral principles. Morality is a code of black and white. When and if men attempt to compromise, it is obvious which side will necessarily lose and which will necessarily profit. Such are the reasons why, when one is asked, surely you don't think in terms of black and white, do you? The proper answer, in essence, if not informed, should be, damn right I do. Observe that their dominant obsessive of being branded black, and with good reason. This is John Kitover, Chicago mayoral candidate, reading Ayn Rand, Chapter 10, Collectivized Ethics. Certain questions, which one frequently hears, are not philosophical queries, but psychological confessions. This is particularly true in the field of ethics. It is especially in discussion of ethics that one must check one's premises or remember them, and more one check the premises of one's adversaries. For instance, objectivists will often hear questions such as, what will be done about the poor or the handicapped in a free society? The collectivist premise implicit in that question is that men are their brother's keepers, and that the misfortune of some is a mortgage on others. The questioner is ignoring or evading the basic premises of objectivist ethics and is attempting to switch to his own collectivist base. Observe that he does not ask, should anything be done, but what will be done? As if the collectivist premise had been tacitly accepted in all the discussion of the means to implement it. Once when Barbara Brandon was asked by a student, what will happen to the poor in an objectivist society? She answered, if you want to help them, you will be stopped. This is the essence of the whole issue and a perfect example of how one refuses to accept an adversary's premises as the basis of discussion. Only individual men have the right to decide when and whether they wish to help others. Society, as an organized political system, has no rights in the matter at all. In question of when, under what conditions it is morally proper for an individual to help others, to God's speech in Atlas shrugged. What concerns us here is the collectivist premise of regarding this issue as political, as the problem or duty of society as a whole. Since nature does not guarantee or security, success and survival to any human being, it is only the dictatorial presumptuousness and the moral cannibalism of the altruist collectivist code that permits a man to suppose or idly to daydream that he can guarantee such security to some men at the expense of others. If a man speculates on what society should do for the poor, he accepts them by the collectivist premise that men's lives belong to society and that he, as a member of society, the right to dispose of them, to set their goals, or to plan the distribution of their efforts. This is the psychological confession implied in such questions and in many issues of the same kind. At best, it prevents psycho-epistemological chaos. It reveals a fallacy which may be termed the fallacy of the frozen abstraction, in which consists the substituting some questions which one frequently hears. This is John, Chicago mayoral candidate, reading Ayn Rand's Virtue of Selfishness. This is Collectivized Ethics, page 94. More often, however, that psychological confession reveals a deeper evil. It reveals the enormous extent to which altruism erodes man's capacity to grasp the concept of rights or the value of an individual life. It reveals a mind from which the reality of a human being has been wiped out. Humility and presumptuousness are two signs of the same premise. To always share the task of filling the space vacated by self-esteem and a collectivized mentality. The man who is willing to serve as the means to the ends of others will necessarily regard others as the means to his ends. The more neurotic he is, or the more conscientious in the practice of altruism, and these two aspects of his psychology will act reciprocally to reinforce each other. The more he will tend to devise schemes for mankind, or of society, or of the public, or of future generations, or of anything except actual human beings. Hence the appalling recklessness with which men propose, discuss, and accept sectarian projects which are to be imposed by political means, that is, by force, on an unlimited number of human beings. According to collectivist caricatures, the greedy rich indulge in profligate material luxury of the price, no object. Then the social progress brought by today's collectivized mentalities consists of indulging in altruistic political planning on the premise of human lives have no object. The hallmark of such advocacy of some grand scale public goal without regard to context, costs, or means, out of context. Such a goal can usually be shown to be desirable. It has to be public, because the cause to be earned, but to be expropriated. And a dense patch of dense fog has to shroud issues of means, because the means are to be human lives. Medicare is such a project. Isn't it desirable that the aged should have medical care in times of illness? Its advocates clamor. Considered out of context, the answer would be yes, it is desirable. Who isn't to say no? And it is at this point that the mental process of a collectivized brain are cut off. The rest is fog. Only the desire remains in his sight. Isn't it? It's not for myself. It's for others. It's for public. For a helpless, ailing public. The fog hides such facts as the enslavement and therefore destruction of the medical science, the regimentation and disintegration of all medical practice. More often, however, This is John Kitover, Chicago mayoral candidate, reading Ayn Rand's Virtue of Selfishness. This is collected on page 95. Medicare is an example of such a project. Isn't it desirable that the aged should have medical care in times of illness? Its advocates clamor. Considered out of context, the answer would be yes, it is desirable. Who would have a reason to say no? And it is at this point that the mental processes of a collectivized brain are cut off. The rest is fog. Only the desire remains in his sight. It's the good. It's not for myself. It's for others. It's for the public. For helpless, ailing public. The fog hides such facts as the enslavement and therefore the destruction of medical science, the regimentation and division of all medical practice, and the sacrifice of the professional integrity, the freedom, the careers, the ambitions, the achievements, the happiness, the lives of the very men who are to provide that desired goal, the doctors. After centuries of civilization, most men, with the exception of criminals, have learned that the above mental attitude is neither practical nor moral in their private lives and may not be applied to of their private goals. There would be no controversy about the moral character of some young hoodlum who declared, "Isn't it desirable to have a yacht, to live in a penthouse, and to drink sherry?" and stubbornly refused to consider the fact that he had robbed a bank, killed 2 guards to achieve that desirable goal. There is no moral difference between these 2 examples. The number of beneficiaries does not change the nature of the action, merely increases the number of victims. In fact, Private Hoodlum has a slight edge of moral superiority. He has no power to devastate an entire nation, and his victims are not legally disarmed. It is men's views of their public or political existence that the collectivized ethics of altruism has protected from the march of civilization and has preserved a reservoir, a wildlife sanctuary ruled by the mores of prehistorical savagery. If men have grasped some faint glimmer of respect for individual rights and their private dealings with one another, their glimmer vanishes when they turn to public issues. And what leaps into the political arena is a caveman who can't conceive of any reason why the tribe may not bash in the skull of any individual it so desires. The distinguishing character of such tribal mentality is the axiomatic, the almost instinctive view of human life as a fodder, fuel, or means for any public project. The examples of such projects are innumerable. Okay, that's going to be the last of this evening. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like and subscribe. This is John Kitover.